My name is Rosemary King. I'm 38 years old, a pediatric nurse by profession, and a mother to a vibrant 7-year-old boy named Noah. Every day, I juggle the relentless demands of the hospital wards with the chaotic joys of parenting, the kind where you're constantly wiping away scraped knees and soothing nighttime fears, all while trying not to collapse from exhaustion. Nursing isn't just a job for me, it's a calling. I've spent the last 15 years caring for children, guiding tiny lives through their darkest moments with calm hands and a steady heart. But when it comes to my own family, things are far more complicated. I grew up in a family that, on the surface, seemed close-knit. We have the kind of old photographs that show smiles frozen in time, at holidays and birthdays, that suggest warmth and unity. But beneath those images lies a complicated story, one marked by favoritism and unspoken tensions. My parents, Martha and George King, have always had a special place in their hearts for my younger sister, Emily. She was their golden child, the one who seemed to shine effortlessly in their eyes. I was the middle child, often caught in the shadows of that glow. Even as an adult, the dynamic hasn't shifted much. I try to maintain a courteous relationship with them. I call regularly, drop by for Sunday dinners, offer help where I can. But there's always a subtle undercurrent, a feeling that no matter what I do, it's not quite enough, or perhaps too much in the wrong ways. They expect me to be the responsible one, the peacemaker, the one who keeps family ties intact, but they never fully acknowledge my efforts. Just last week, we had a family dinner at their house, a rare gathering of all of us under one roof. The table was set beautifully, with Martha's signature floral arrangement at the center, the kind of dinner where everyone tries to pretend everything's fine. I brought Noah along, hoping to keep them connected to him, especially now that his health has been fragile. As I carefully passed around dishes and tried to engage my parents in conversation about Noah's treatment, I noticed the shift. They were polite, yes, but distant. When I tried to share updates about Noah's condition, the room grew quiet. Martha quickly changed the subject, steering the conversation toward Emily's upcoming vacation plans. George kept glancing at his phone, scrolling through messages as if they were more important than the boy sitting right across from him. The unspoken message was clear. Noah's struggles weren't something they wanted to dwell on. They wanted to focus on the lighter, more glamorous parts of family life. It stung in a way that was hard to put into words. Here I was, fighting to keep my son alive, and they could barely spare a moment's genuine concern. I caught Noah's eyes across the table, his little face hopeful, trusting. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a smile, telling myself this was just another phase, another awkward moment among many. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just awkward. It was a sign of the growing chasm between us. Family love, I realized, wasn't the unconditional, unbreakable bond I'd hoped for. It was conditional, wrapped up in years of favoritism, expectations, and disappointments. I tried to hold on to the hope that things would improve, that they'd see Noah for the brave little boy he is, and me for the mother doing everything possible. But that night, as I tucked Noah into bed afterward, my heart was heavier than usual. I lay awake long after his breathing steadied, replaying the dinner in my mind. The smiles, the forced laughter, the sudden silences, they all felt like pieces of a puzzle where the picture was slowly coming into focus. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. My relationship with my parents was fraught with tension, and Noah's health was fragile. Somehow, I had to find a way to navigate both without losing myself. This is my story, a story of love, disappointment, and the difficult choices a mother makes when the family she thought she had doesn't stand beside her. Growing up, the lines of favoritism in our family were never drawn with blunt words or outright declarations, but with subtle gestures and carefully cultivated patterns that carved deep grooves in my heart. I remember, as clearly as if it were yesterday, the way my parents' eyes would light up whenever Emily achieved something, no matter how small, while my own efforts seemed to dissolve into the background noise of their lives. One of the earliest memories that still haunts me is from when I was about 10 years old. I had spent weeks practicing for a school recital, countless afternoons rehearsing piano pieces until my fingers ached, determined to make my parents proud. The night of the recital, the auditorium was packed with parents and relatives, all eagerly waiting. I played my piece, a Chopin nocturne, with as much grace and passion as my young hands could muster. When I finished, the applause was polite, but I scanned the crowd for my parents' faces, hoping for that spark of pride or at least a warm smile. Instead, I caught Martha whispering to George about how Emily had just won a local art contest and how much more promising it was. Their attention was elsewhere, and I felt my heart sink. That same summer, Emily got a new bike as a reward for her achievements, bright red, shiny, with tassels on the handles, while my own bike, a hand-me-down from cousins, sat in the garage, a reminder of the invisible line between us. It wasn't just the gifts or the praise. It was the way they celebrated Emily's successes with grand gestures, dinners out, and family-wide announcements, while I was expected to quietly accept a reserved nod or a, "That's nice, Rosemary," before the conversation moved on. Family vacations only widened that gap. When I was 12, my parents took Emily on a week-long trip to the beach, an adventure filled with sun, sandcastle competitions, and late-night ice cream runs. I was left behind with a babysitter, my presence deemed less essential or less worthy of investment. I remember staring out the window for days, feeling the sting of exclusion, the kind that seeps deep into a child's sense of belonging. At family gatherings and holidays, Martha would often compare us in front of relatives. "Emily is so organized, just like her father," she would say, while I was labeled quiet, serious, a polite way of saying less interesting. Or those subtle messages told me I was the problem child, the one who didn't quite measure up. Over time, these patterns became the backdrop to every family interaction. I learned to hide my disappointment behind forced smiles, to brush off the sting of being overlooked. I told myself it was just the way things were, that my parents were stressed, or that perhaps Emily just needed more encouragement because she was younger. I rationalized their behavior as tradition, a family's flawed way of showing love, hoping it was temporary. But the truth settled in quietly, like a shadow growing longer with each passing year. No matter how hard I tried, my achievements would never ignite the same warmth or pride that Emily's did. The emotional exclusion wasn't limited to celebrations or material rewards. It was the absence of encouragement when I faced difficulties, the lack of a listening ear when I was overwhelmed, and the expectation to always be the strong one, responsible, composed, and silent. Meanwhile, Emily's missteps were met with swift forgiveness, or even enabled by their indulgence. I saw this over and over again, the golden child shielded from consequences, while I bore the weight of responsibility and critique. Looking back, I realize how these experiences shaped me, made me diligent, careful, and determined to prove my worth, not by seeking approval, but through quiet perseverance. Yet, beneath that exterior was a reservoir of loneliness and a yearning for equal acknowledgement. The years of being sidelined, of being the middle child caught between parents who seemed to adore one daughter and dismiss the other, laid the groundwork for the tensions that still simmer in our family today. Even now, as an adult navigating my own challenges, the echoes of those childhood moments reverberate. I see how the seeds of favoritism planted in my youth have grown into divisions that continue to define my relationship with my parents. It's a legacy I never wanted for my son, one I fight against every day as I try to build a different kind of family for Noah, where love isn't measured by comparison, and where every achievement, every struggle, is met with equal care and respect. But those early wounds remain a part of my story, a reminder of how deeply family dynamics can shape a life, for better or worse. Over the years, I found myself quietly sacrificing so much for a family that seemed oblivious to my efforts. It's strange how the people who should be your greatest supporters often take your sacrifices for granted, or worse, expect them as a given. I put my own ambitions on hold more times than I can count. I remember turning down promotion opportunities at the hospital because I needed the flexibility to be available for my parents when they needed help. Not because they ever asked directly, but because the unspoken expectation was always there. Rosemary is reliable. Rosemary will step in. When their car broke down in the middle of winter one year, It was me who rearranged my shifts to drive them to appointments, even though it meant missing out on overtime pay. When George had a minor surgery and Martha was overwhelmed with organizing Emily's wedding plans, I was the one juggling Noah's school schedule with hospital visits while fielding their calls asking for updates. I never complained out loud. It just felt like the natural order of things. I was the dependable daughter, the caregiver, the one who made the family machinery run smoothly behind the scenes. Financially, I also gave more than most realized. Whenever there was an emergency, unexpected repairs on their house, a sudden medical bill, or a tight month for Emily's expenses, I quietly slipped them money. No fanfare, no acknowledgement. I never kept track, but it certainly added up. I rationalized these contributions as part of being a good daughter, even though it sometimes meant stretching my budget thin or postponing things Noah needed. One of the biggest sacrifices was during Emily's wedding, which would become a glaring example of how my efforts were overlooked. I was deeply involved, not just emotionally, but physically and financially. I provided free childcare for Emily's flower girls during rehearsals, often staying late after my exhausting shifts at the hospital to help with last-minute arrangements. I was there the day Emily's bridal gown was altered, offering my opinion and support while keeping Noah entertained in the corner. Behind the scenes, I contributed thousands of dollars to cover unexpected costs Emily claimed she couldn't afford, mostly to keep the wedding looking flawless in front of our parents. David, my husband, often found himself in the middle of family disputes, trying to mediate without taking sides. His calm presence helped, but I could see the toll it took on him. He doesn't like conflict, and he would rather smooth things over than let tensions fester. I admired his support, but sometimes I wished he would stand up more firmly on our behalf. Still, I understood his reluctance. He wanted peace for our little family, and family peace meant accepting the status quo, that I was the one who had to compromise. Despite all this, I held on to hope. I believed that if I just kept giving, kept showing up, kept being the dependable one, my parents would eventually recognize my worth, not just as their daughter, but as a mother fighting to keep her son healthy. I clung to the idea of family first, hoping it meant something real beyond empty words. After all, isn't that what families do? They lift each other up, share burdens, and celebrate each other's successes. But there was always a knot of unease tightening inside me. Every time I witnessed the extravagant attention lavished on Emily, it felt like a silent message. Her happiness was more important than mine. Her needs took precedence even when mine were urgent. The disparity between what I gave and what I received wasn't just unfair. It was heartbreaking. Yet, I kept going, because what choice did I have? My son depended on me. David depended on me. And somewhere deep inside, I still yearned for a family that could be whole and supportive. But the cracks were widening, and I sensed that the sacrifices I was making were building toward a moment of reckoning I wasn't quite ready to face. Emily's wedding was everything my parents had dreamed of, and then some. From the moment we stepped into the grand ballroom of the country club, I could see that no expense had been spared. Crystal chandeliers sparkled under the soft glow of candlelight. Tables were adorned with opulent floral arrangements that looked almost too perfect to be real, and the air was thick with the hum of excited voices and clinking glasses. It was a celebration fit for a princess, and Emily was the undisputed queen of the night. I had spent countless hours helping with the wedding preparations, coordinating with vendors, watching over flower girls, and quietly covering costs that Emily claimed she couldn't afford. But tonight, none of that labor or sacrifice would earn me even a fraction of the spotlight. Instead, I found myself standing on the fringes of the party, a silent observer while my family basked in the glow of Emily's perfect day. The moment that broke me started with a toast. Martha, radiant in a designer gown that shimmered under the lights, stepped up to the microphone with a glass of champagne. Her smile was wide, but there was a rehearsed quality to it, the kind of practiced warmth meant to impress the assembled guests rather than convey genuine feeling. "To my darling Emily," she began, her voice ringing out clearly across the room. "Today, we celebrate not just a beautiful wedding, but the incredible young woman Emily has become. She's brought so much joy and pride into our lives. Her kindness, her talent, and her unwavering spirit are truly unmatched. We are so blessed to call her our daughter." The room erupted in applause, and Emily's face bloomed with the kind of radiant happiness that only comes from being the center of attention. I clapped too, but it felt hollow inside. The words Martha spoke, glowing, effusive, and utterly one-sided, made it clear where the family's heart truly lay. When Martha's gaze briefly swept the room, it landed on me. I caught the flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, a mixture of dismissal and calculation, before she quickly moved on, her speech continuing without acknowledging any of the sacrifices I'd made or the challenges I faced. I wanted to say something, to remind them all that I was here, that I too had struggles and dreams, and a son fighting for his life, but the words caught in my throat. Later, over dinner, I gathered a little courage and tried to bring up Noah's health, the costly surgery he desperately needed, the mounting medical bills that seemed impossible to cover. "Mom, Dad," I began cautiously, "we're still facing $85,000 for Noah's surgery. I know it's a lot, but I was hoping you might be able to help." Their response was swift and cold. Martha's smile tightened, and she exchanged a glance with George before replying, "Rosemary, this isn't the time or place to discuss that. We have other priorities right now." Her voice was calm, but carried an edge that brooked no argument. George nodded, adding, "We've done what we can already. This wedding has taken a lot of resources." His words hit me like a slap, as if my son's life was a mere afterthought, a financial burden to be shrugged off in favor of lavish celebrations. Emily, sitting nearby, caught my eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible smirk, the kind that said, "This is how it's always been." It was the same look of entitlement she wore like a second skin, the quiet assurance that she was the favored daughter, untouchable and adored. I felt a wave of shame and anger rise inside me, but more than anything, I felt heartbreak. Here was my family, gathered in opulence, celebrating my sister's happiness with every ounce of energy and money they had, while my son's life, which was hanging in the balance, was dismissed with a shrug. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I smiled when I needed to, nodded along to conversations, and watched as everyone toasted to Emily's perfect life. But inside, I was unraveling. I longed for one genuine word of support, one glance that said, "We see you, we care," but it never came. That night, after the guests had gone and the last glass was emptied, I sat alone in the quiet darkness of the empty ballroom. The echoes of laughter and music felt like a cruel reminder of everything I didn't have: the love, the recognition, the support that my son and I so desperately needed. The contrast was unbearable. A $230,000 wedding overshadowing an $85,000 surgery we were left to face alone. As I lay awake that night in the guest room assigned to me, I thought about the years I'd poured into this family, the sacrifices made in silence, and the cold dismissal of my son's very real needs. I realized, with a sinking certainty, that this wasn't just about money. It was about where I belonged in their eyes, a place far from the center, always on the margins. And yet, despite it all, I told myself to hold on, to hope, because the alternative, giving up, was unthinkable. I promised Noah, as I whispered a prayer over his sleeping form, that I would find a way. Somehow I would fight for him, even if it meant standing alone against the people who should have been his strongest defenders. But deep down, I couldn't shake the ache of that night. The night my family's priorities were so brutally clear, and my son's life was weighed and found wanting. The moment I realized things had truly broken beyond repair came not in a heated argument or a dramatic confrontation, but in the cold, calculated decision my parents made when my son Noah's surgery was still a looming, desperate need. I'd been fighting for months, gathering estimates, speaking to specialists, navigating insurance hurdles, all while watching Noah's health decline inch by inch, his vibrant energy dimming under the weight of uncertainty. The surgery, a complex, delicate procedure, was my son's last hope, and it cost $85,000. A staggering sum, yes, but not insurmountable, considering the resources my parents held so freely for my sister. I remember the day my husband David and I approached Martha and George together. We wanted to be upfront, honest and hopeful. I still clung to the idea that family meant support, that blood meant something unbreakable. We sat in their lavish living room, the walls adorned with framed photos of Emily's milestones, her graduation, her engagement, her smiling face glowing with happiness in every frame. Those images felt like silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. "Mom, Dad," I began, voice steady despite the tightening knot in my chest. "You know how serious Noah's condition is. The doctors have recommended surgery, but the cost it's higher than we expected." I glanced at David, who squeezed my hand encouragingly. "We're hoping you might be able to help with some of the expenses." Martha's smile was polite, but her eyes flickered briefly with calculation. George leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, studying us as if we were negotiating a business deal. Then, without hesitation, Martha said, "Rosemary, we've already committed a lot to Emily's wedding and honeymoon. It wasn't cheap. You know how important that was for the family. It's just, Noah's surgery is urgent," I pressed, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "If we don't get this done soon, the risks increase. We've been scrambling to cover what we can, but we're still short." George's jaw tightened. "We can't keep stretching ourselves financially, Rosemary. You have David, and you have your job. You need to manage your own household." The words landed like a physical blow. I blinked, struggling to believe what I was hearing. "But you have a medical emergency fund," I whispered, the hope in my voice faltering. "I thought that was for situations like this." Martha shook her head slowly, her voice low but firm. "That fund doesn't cover everything, and it's not meant to subsidize every personal expense. We have priorities, and right now, Emily's honeymoon is one of them." It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. My son's life, his very breath, was being weighed against a lavish vacation, and somehow, the vacation won. Later, I found out from a family friend that Martha and George had explicitly excluded me and Noah from the family's emergency medical fund. They had drawn a line in the sand, and we were on the wrong side of it. The fund was not a resource for my son's surgery. It was a secret vault reserved for Emily's needs and their own comforts. When I confronted them, with David by my side and a family lawyer present, the exchange was bitter and surreal. I laid out the facts, the bills, the doctor's recommendations. I spoke from the depths of a mother's fear and hope, but Martha accused me of financial mismanagement, implying that if I couldn't handle my own family's money, I shouldn't expect assistance. George echoed the sentiment, his pride turning cold and hard. "You've made your choices, Rosemary. We can't keep bailing you out," George said, his tone final. "You need to take responsibility." David tried to mediate, his voice calm but strained. "We're not asking for a handout. We're asking for family support at a critical time." But Martha's answer was firm. "Family support means knowing when to say no. We've done enough." I stood there, stunned, the weight of their rejection crashing down. The lawyer quietly took notes, witnessing the fracture that had opened wider than I ever imagined. That night, as I held Noah close, feeling his fragile heartbeat against my chest, I realized that the family I had hoped would protect us was choosing to protect only one child. My son's life, my sacrifices, my pleas, they were invisible, dismissed as burdens or inconveniences. In that moment, I stopped hoping for their empathy. Instead, a cold, painful clarity took root. They had made their choice, and now I had to make mine. That night, after we left my parents' house, David and I sat silently in the car, the weight of everything pressing down on us like a suffocating fog. Noah was asleep in the back seat, his breathing steady but fragile, unaware of the storm swirling around him. I stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur into long streaks as the tears I refused to shed finally welled up. For years, I'd carried this quiet hope that my parents would come through for us, that deep down, family meant something more than appearances and favoritism. But what I had just witnessed wasn't love. It was cold calculation wrapped in polite words. David reached over and took my hand. His touch was grounding, a lifeline in the swirling chaos inside me. "Rosemary," he said softly, "we've got each other. We'll figure this out." His voice was gentle, but I could hear the strain beneath it, the exhaustion from being caught between my family's expectations and our own reality. I shook my head, swallowing the lump in my throat. It's not just about the money, David. It's everything. The years of being overlooked, dismissed, expected to sacrifice without thanks. I've tried to be the good daughter, the peacemaker, the strong one, but they never saw me. Not really. My voice cracked, but I pushed the words out because I needed to say them, to give weight to the pain I'd carried silently for so long. The truth settled over me like a cold wave. My parents had made a choice. They chose Emily and her perfect life over my son's very survival. That realization cut deeper than any wound. It was a betrayal that wasn't loud or dramatic, but quiet and complete. They had drawn a line, and Noah and I were on the wrong side. I thought about every birthday ignored, every achievement uncelebrated, every holiday where I was the invisible daughter. How many times had I silenced my own needs to keep the peace? How many moments had I pushed down my hurt, telling myself it was just family dynamics, that someday it would change? But the truth was undeniable now. It wasn't going to change. They never intended to see me, not as an equal, not as a mother fighting for her child. A fierce anger began to rise within me, sharp and clear. Not the kind of rage that explodes in shouting matches, but a cold, steady fire that fuels resolve. This wasn't just grief anymore. It was the moment I stopped hoping for their kindness and started demanding respect, for myself and for Noah. David squeezed my hand again, sensing the shift. Whatever you need, whatever you decide to do, I'm right here with you. His support was a balm, but it also reminded me how alone I was in this fight. My parents, the people who should have been my allies, had turned their backs, and now it was up to me to protect my son, to protect us. I thought about the future, uncertain, but no longer clouded by false hope. I knew I had to step back, to stop being the family's fixer, the silent supporter who was always expected to give without receiving. I had to set boundaries, to let go of the idea that love was unconditional in this family. Because if it was, why had they refused to save my son? The pain was raw, but beneath it, a new strength was beginning to grow. I would fight for Noah's life, not with begged favors or whispered requests, but with clear eyes and firm hands. No more invisibility, no more being the forgotten daughter. That night, as I held David close and listened to Noah's steady breathing in the next room, I made a silent vow. I would protect my son, even if it meant standing alone against the people who were supposed to be his family. The old hope had died, but from its ashes, something fiercer was rising, a resolve to claim the love and respect we deserved, no matter the cost. In the days and weeks that followed that shattering confrontation, I found myself sinking into a quiet, determined solitude. The noise of the hospital, the laughter of my son, even the routine chatter of David, all of it seemed to fade into the background as I retreated into a space where I could finally start to process what had happened. But processing soon morphed into planning. I knew that if I wanted to protect Noah, to secure his future and our independence from the family that had so clearly abandoned us, I had to be methodical, precise, strategic. My first step was to gather every piece of paperwork I could find: the hospital bills, the surgeon's detailed quotes, the insurance correspondence, and the countless medical notes I'd meticulously kept over the years. I spread them all out on the kitchen table one rainy Saturday morning, the faint patter of raindrops against the window the only sound as I worked. Each invoice, each estimate was a cold reminder of the price we were paying, but also a symbol of my responsibility. This wasn't just about money, it was about survival. Alongside the medical documents, I pulled out old bank statements and records of the financial assistance I'd quietly provided to my parents and Emily over the years. There were the wire transfers for emergency home repairs, the anonymous checks slipped into envelopes during family crises, and the credit card statements from countless contributions to Emily's wedding preparations. Seeing the numbers laid bare, a slow burn of clarity ignited inside me. Their generosity was a one-way street, paved by my sacrifices. The scales had long been tipped, and now it was time to right them. But money and bills alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to understand the legal landscape, the inheritance structures, trusts, and rights that could affect Noah and me going forward. That meant I had to speak to someone who understood the intricacies of family law and estate planning. I reached out to a lawyer I'd met years ago through a hospital fundraiser, someone known for her discretion and sharp mind. Our first meeting was cautious and clinical, but I laid everything bare: the family dynamics, the financial exclusions, the heartbreaking refusal to help with Noah's surgery. She nodded with quiet understanding, listening as I unfolded my story piece by piece. "Rosemary," she said gently, "you're in a stronger position than you might realize. The fact that your parents have excluded you and Noah from their emergency fund could work in your favor, especially when it comes to trusts and inheritance claims. But you need to be strategic. Document everything, keep records, and think about your long-term plan for Noah's care and security." That conversation marked a turning point. I began to see the path ahead, not just as a battle for immediate survival, but as a campaign to reclaim agency over my family's narrative and my son's future. I spent hours poring over legal documents, family trust agreements, and property deeds. I cross-referenced every clause, every line that could give me leverage or protect Noah from being disregarded again. Each page I read bolstered my resolve. At the same time, I started to quietly discuss with David what this shift would mean for us. He was cautious but supportive, understanding that while I wanted peace, I also needed firm boundaries. We talked about securing our finances, separating accounts, and making sure Noah's medical care wouldn't be subject to anyone else's approval or whim. David helped me draft new arrangements for our wills and medical powers of attorney. We decided to tighten security on shared accounts and update passwords to prevent any unauthorized access. There was a subtle and steady transformation happening within me. The exhaustion and heartbreak hadn't disappeared, but they were now tempered by a growing sense of control. I realized that the caregiving and sacrifices I'd long made for my parents and Emily had been taken for granted because I never set limits. Now I was drawing new lines, carefully, deliberately, not out of anger or spite, but out of necessity. Even as I maintained a calm and polite exterior around my parents, I was no longer the silent victim. I was becoming a strategist, quietly rebuilding the fortress around my little family. The look in Martha's eyes when I stopped answering her calls immediately, or George's brief hesitation when I declined their invitations, was subtle, but real. They sensed something had changed, but they didn't understand the full extent of the shift. For them, I was still Rosemary, the responsible daughter, but now, I was also the woman who would no longer be manipulated or dismissed. At night, when Noah's soft breathing filled the room and David's steady presence was beside me, I allowed myself a moment of quiet hope. Not the naive hope of before, but a fierce, guarded hope. I was protecting my son, yes, but I was also protecting myself, and that made all the difference. The road ahead was uncertain, and the family fractures would widen before they healed, if healing was even possible. But I had made my decision. I was ready to fight for respect, for fairness, and for the future my son deserved, and I would do it on my terms. Since that quiet turning point, my life took on a new rhythm, one that no longer revolved around bending myself to the demands of a family that had shown me where I truly stood. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible to anyone else. But for me, each decision was a deliberate step away from the patterns that had defined my entire adulthood. The first change was simple, yet profound. I stopped co-signing any loans or financial requests from my parents or Emily. It wasn't an easy choice. For years, whenever there was a financial hiccup, a sudden car repair, an unexpected bill, I was the safety net, the silent guarantor. I remember the initial text from Martha, a casual ask for help with a credit card payment. I stared at my phone longer than I should have, heart hurting, but resolve hardening. I typed back a polite refusal, explaining that I needed to focus on my own bills and Noah's medical expenses. It felt like drawing a line in the sand. Declining had consequences. Martha's response was a mixture of surprise and thinly veiled disappointment. She called me a few days later, her voice carefully measured. "Rosemary, we're family. We help each other." I wanted to scream back that family wasn't supposed to be a one-way street, that I'd been helping for years without thanks. But I stayed calm. "I'm still here for Noah and for you in ways that I can manage. but financially, I have to be responsible for my own household now. I could hear the subtle shift in her tone, a flicker of frustration masked by concern. Alongside financial boundaries, I began pulling back from the caregiving roles I'd long shouldered. It was tiring, yes, but more than that, it was about reclaiming space that had been colonized by their expectations. When Emily's wedding planning escalated last year, I had been the go-to for free childcare, last-minute errands, and emotional support. I loved Emily, but I realized it was never truly appreciated. It was expected. So when they asked if I could watch the Flower Girls again for a rehearsal the weekend before the wedding, I declined, citing an unavoidable work commitment. Saying no felt foreign, like breaking a lifelong habit of self-sacrifice. But I was learning that I didn't owe anyone my exhaustion. David supported this shift quietly, often stepping in to help with family logistics that used to fall squarely on me. I could see the relief in his eyes when I said, "I won't be taking on those extra hours anymore. Noah needs me, and I need to focus there." Family invitations started to come less frequently, or when extended, I declined without elaborate explanations. The annual holiday dinners, the surprise birthday parties for Emily, the casual Sunday brunches at my parents' house, I stopped accepting these as mandatory obligations. Instead, I made clear that my time was limited, especially with Noah's health and my work schedule. Some invitations were met with polite understanding, others with thinly veiled irritation, but I was steadfast. Alongside these social withdrawals, I took firm control of our financial and medical affairs. I sat with David at our kitchen table late into the nights, discussing how to secure Noah's future. We updated our wills, explicitly excluding my parents and Emily from any inheritance or decision-making related to Noah. It was a painful but necessary step, writing those words out, acknowledging that they might never be part of his life in a meaningful way. I changed all our shared passwords on bank and medical accounts, transitioning to new email addresses and phone numbers that offered more privacy and security. The idea of my parents or Emily having any access or influence over Noah's medical care was no longer acceptable. I arranged for Noah's treatment to be overseen by a specialist far removed from our family circle, someone who understood the emotional complexity of our situation and respected our need for independence. Despite these changes, I maintained a careful calm when I interacted with my parents. I answered calls but was brief, polite but distant. I noticed the flicker of confusion and sometimes frustration in their eyes when I declined their invitations or gently refused to discuss financial matters. George's usual arrogance seemed tempered by a wariness, as if he sensed the shifting tides, but couldn't quite grasp what was happening beneath the surface. Martha, ever the master of social grace, masked her discomfort behind rehearsed smiles and inquiries about Noah's health. But I could tell she was guarding herself. The ornate dining table where we once gathered felt like a battleground of unspoken tensions, and I was no longer willing to be the silent mediator. At home, with David and Noah, I felt a fragile sense of victory. The boundaries we were setting were not just about distance. They were about survival and dignity. I could finally breathe a little easier, knowing that I was protecting the little family I had built, even if it meant pushing away the family I was born into. The road ahead was uncertain. I knew my parents wouldn't give up their expectations easily, nor would Emily relinquish her place as the favored daughter without a fight. But I was ready to face whatever came next with clear eyes and a steady heart, because for the first time in a long time, I was acting for myself and for Noah, not for the approval of a family that had shown me where I truly stood. And so, the subtle withdrawal continued, layer by layer, until the distance between us became undeniable. The question wasn't whether they noticed, it was what they would do about it. The day of the family meeting arrived with a strange mixture of calm and quiet tension. I remember sitting across from Martha, George, and Emily at the polished dining table, an ornate piece my parents prized as a symbol of their status, but to me, it often felt like a stage where family dramas played out in carefully choreographed acts. The light filtering through the lace curtains cast soft patterns on the mahogany surface, and somewhere in the background, the faint ticking of the grandfather clock punctuated the silence between us. I took a deep breath, steadying the storm of emotions that had been simmering for months. My hands rested on a neatly organized folder, a compilation of years of evidence I had gathered: hospital bills, legal documents, correspondence, and my carefully annotated notes detailing the financial exclusions and decisions that had cut Noah and me out of the family's support system. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice calm but firm. "I've asked for this meeting because we need to address some things that can no longer be ignored." Their eyes shifted, Martha's sharp gaze calculating, George's expression guarded, and Emily's posture stiff with entitlement. "I want to be clear," I continued, "that I have withdrawn all financial support to this family. This includes co-signing loans, covering unexpected expenses, and any informal assistance given over the years." Their surprise was almost palpable. I could see the flicker of disbelief cross Martha's face, quickly replaced by a practiced mask of composure. Then came the moment I had prepared for: the legal decisions. "I have also taken the necessary steps to legally remove both of you, Mom and Dad, as well as Emily, from my son Noah's medical trust and from my estate plans. This was not a decision I made lightly, but it is one I make with full conviction, and for the protection of my family." The words felt like a release as I spoke them aloud, the weight of years of pain and sacrifice finding voice. I reached into the folder and laid out copies of the documents on the table: notarized legal papers, trust amendments, and financial statements. "These documents prove that despite your wealth and resources, you refused to help cover Noah's surgery, which cost $85,000. I paid for it myself." My eyes locked onto Martha's, searching for any sign of remorse or acknowledgement, but there was none. Just the cold calculation I'd known too well. The room was thick with shock, and a silence so heavy it pressed against my ears. George shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. Emily's face flushed, a mix of anger and humiliation flickering behind her eyes. Martha's lips tightened into a thin line, her voice finally breaking the silence. "Rosemary, you're making a mistake. Family means supporting each other, not this attack." "No, Mom," I replied steadily. "Family means respect, fairness, and standing with each other in times of need. And you made your choice. You chose Emily over my son's life. I can't allow that to continue." The words hung in the air, undeniable and irrevocable. I outlined the boundaries I was setting moving forward. Any contact from this point must be based on genuine respect and acknowledgement of past wrongs. Contact under conditions of manipulation, guilt-tripping, or denial will not be tolerated. I felt a quiet strength settle in my chest, a hard-earned armor forged by years of being overlooked and dismissed. David sat beside me, offering a subtle nod of support. His presence was a reminder that I was not alone in this fight. For so long, I had carried the burden silently. But now, with these declarations made publicly to those who had hurt us, I was reclaiming my voice and my agency. As I gathered the papers back into the folder, I saw the flicker of something new in the room: unease, vulnerability, and perhaps the first cracks in the illusion of control my parents so desperately clung to. This meeting was not about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity and safety for my little family. The conversation didn't end with peace or understanding, but with a clear shift in power. I left the table knowing that the road ahead would be difficult, that the fallout from this confrontation would ripple through our family in ways none of us could predict. Yet, for the first time, I felt a measure of control and hope, a fierce determination to protect my son, no matter what it cost. The door to the dining room closed behind me, but the echoes of that meeting would linger, setting the stage for the battles and reckonings yet to come. The moment I stepped away from that family meeting, the atmosphere didn't just thicken, it turned electric. I could almost feel the shock waves rippling through the King household. Martha and George, who had always wielded their power with a confident, unshakable grip, suddenly looked unmoored, exposed. That evening, their carefully constructed facade of control began to crumble, and they scrambled desperately to reclaim the influence they'd lost. Martha was the first to strike. She called me the very next day, her voice dripping with an insincere sweetness that felt like acid beneath the surface. "Rosemary, darling," she began, as if we had just shared a pleasant cup of tea. "I'm so sorry if you felt hurt by what I said. Family sometimes says things in the heat of the moment. We never meant to exclude you or Noah. Her words sounded rehearsed, hollow, no real remorse behind them. I could hear her thinking ahead, calculating how to reel me back in, to make me doubt my own resolve. But I wasn't going to give her the chance. I answered calmly, "Mom, I heard what I needed to hear at the meeting. Words without action won't heal this, and I'm focused on protecting Noah now." I ended the call gently but firmly. There was no space for manipulation, no room for empty apologies. George followed quickly, but his approach was different, more blunt, edged with pride and veiled threats. He left a voicemail, the kind that made the air in my chest tighten. "Rosemary, you're making a mistake. Family is family. You're burning bridges that can't be rebuilt easily. Think about what this will do, not just to you, but to Noah." His voice was low, almost warning. I knew what he meant. Cut off the support and you'll regret it. But after everything, his threats sounded hollow, desperate. Meanwhile, Emily, ever the golden child, turned her attention to David. She knew he was the softer side of this equation, the peacemaker who hated conflict but wanted harmony for his family. Over the next few days, David found himself fielding calls, texts, even a few awkward in-person visits from Emily. She pleaded, argued, and sometimes resorted to thinly veiled guilt trips. "David, can't you just talk some sense into Rosemary? This isn't how families should behave. If she really cared about her parents and Emily, she'd reconsider." David, caught between his loyalty to me and the pressure from his in-laws, became visibly strained. I'd see him pacing at night, running his hands over his face. But every time Emily pushed, David gently reminded her, "Rosemary's made her decision. We're focused on what's best for our son." He stood firm for us, even when it wasn't easy. Through all this, I stayed resolute. I refused to be drawn back into their games. When Martha sent texts dripping with passive-aggressive lamentations, "It's so sad when family turns cold. We hoped you'd keep the door open," I didn't reply. When George tried to corner me at a community event, his voice low and threatening, I kept my answers brief, polite, and unwavering. I wasn't there to argue or explain. I was there to protect my family's peace. The family's reactions spilled beyond our immediate circle. Friends and extended relatives started to hear whispers, rumors sparked by the fracture that had burst open. But this time, the narrative was shifting. Instead of the usual family loyalty rallying to silence dissent, many people began to question the King family's story. How could they celebrate lavish weddings and luxury honeymoons when a child's surgery was ignored? People expressed quiet sympathy for me and Noah, and the once unassailable image of the perfect King family began to crack. And Emily, the golden child, suddenly found herself without the cushions she'd long taken for granted. The financial support that had flowed so freely began to dry up. I heard through mutual friends that a few vendors from the wedding hadn't been paid on time, that small but telling cracks were appearing in the polished surface of her privileged life. The entitlement she wore like a second skin was now strained, replaced by frustration and uncertainty. At home, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of me mourned the loss of the family I'd hoped for, the idea that love would be enough to bridge these divides. But a stronger part of me felt relief. A deep, steady calm that came from no longer pretending, no longer sacrificing my own needs for a family that had shown its true colors. David and I talked late into the night, sometimes in silence, sometimes with tears, but always with the certainty that we were building something new, a family defined by respect, honesty, and unconditional care. Still, the war wasn't over. Martha and George's panic was palpable. Their attempts at damage control only underscored how much they'd lost, and how powerless they felt. And Emily's discomfort signaled that our actions were beginning to reshape the family's power dynamics in ways they never expected. As their world shifted beneath them, I knew the next steps would be crucial. The days ahead would demand more strength, more clarity, and above all, an unwavering commitment to the boundaries I'd set. Because in this family, respect wasn't given. It had to be earned, and I was done waiting for it. The fallout from that family meeting was far more than a shock. It was a seismic shift that roared through the King household like a storm breaking on fragile ground. Suddenly, the carefully maintained facade of unshakable control Martha and George had clung to began to crumble, revealing cracks that had been forming beneath the surface for years. Without my quiet but steady support, the foundations of their estate and business started to show signs of serious strain. I heard through the grapevine that the family's finances were unraveling. The estate, once a symbol of my parents' success and pride, was now threatened by foreclosure. I learned that George's business, which had always been a pillar of the family's wealth, was suffering from mismanagement and mounting debts. It seemed that the couple had relied heavily on my contributions, both financial and logistical, to keep their affairs afloat without ever acknowledging it. Now, stripped of my help, their world was starting to spin out of control. What struck me most was the toll this turmoil was taking on George's health. I had always known him as a man full of pride and stubbornness, but the stress of these setbacks weighed heavily on him. Friends whispered that he was showing signs of high blood pressure, his face often pale and drawn, his usual sharpness dulled by fatigue. There were murmurs about hospital visits, quiet and private, nothing his family wanted broadcast. It was a reminder that beneath the imposing figure of the family patriarch was a vulnerable man buckling under pressure. Martha, ever the social matriarch, found her position eroding as well. Her usual poise and charm were overshadowed by growing whispers in their social circles. The once admired hostess was now the subject of sympathy and speculation, as community members questioned how a family known for their generosity and standing could so callously neglect a child in desperate need. Invitations to charity events dwindled, and the subtle social snubs stung more than any open confrontation. I imagined how isolating that must have felt for her, though I couldn't summon any real sympathy. At the same time, the fractures in their carefully curated image became harder to conceal. Extended family members and longtime friends started to take sides, or at least to question the narrative they had been told. Rumors spread quietly but insistently about the refusal to help with Noah's surgery and the lavish spending on Emily's wedding and honeymoon. Conversations that once skirted around uncomfortable truths began to address the elephant in the room. I heard of relatives privately expressing regret, or even guilt, while others dug in their heels, defending Martha and George out of loyalty or denial. The family's cohesion was unraveling thread by thread. I stayed focused, documenting these developments with a clinical eye. Every foreclosure notice, every business report signaling trouble, every whispered update about George's health was logged carefully, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. If the family wanted to keep up appearances, they would have to reckon with the consequences of their choices, and I was ready to hold them to account. Meanwhile, Emily's golden child status was slipping too. The financial backing that had always been her safety net was now shaky at best. I heard from mutual acquaintances that some of the wedding vendors had not been paid on time, leading to uncomfortable conversations behind closed doors. Emily, who had so long enjoyed a life of privilege cushioned by my parents' largesse, and indirectly, my sacrifices, was suddenly facing the reality of tightening belts. The confident smirks and entitled gestures were replaced by frustration and uncertainty. It was a quiet unraveling, but no less significant for its subtlety. Through it all, I maintained my composure, knowing that to waver or show weakness would give them an opening to pull me back into the toxic dynamics I was trying so hard to escape. At home, David and I held each other up. Some nights, the weight of what had happened pressed down on us like a physical force, but our resolve never faltered. We talked openly about our fears and hopes, about building a life led by honesty and respect rather than obligation and disappointment. Yet even as I found peace in this new chapter, I knew the battle was far from over. Martha's and George's panic was palpable, their attempts at damage control growing more desperate and erratic. The stakes were no longer just about money or appearances. They were about the very survival of their family's legacy, and their loss of control was absolute. Emily's discomfort and faltering confidence signaled that the old power dynamics were shifting, forcing all of us to confront uncomfortable truths. As the days passed, the divide within the Kings deepened. Some relatives offered quiet support, others turned away. The community's whispered judgments grew louder, and the once untouchable family found itself isolated. Through it all, I held firm to the boundaries I'd set, knowing that respect had to be earned, and that I would no longer allow my family's pain to be overshadowed or ignored. The road ahead remained uncertain and fraught with challenges, but beneath it all, a new strength was rising, one forged from heartbreak, resilience, and a fierce determination to protect what mattered most. Since drawing those firm boundaries, I've come to understand that the real work isn't just about setting limits. It's about redefining what family means on my own terms. The old idea of unconditional loyalty, where I sacrifice endlessly and hope for a return that never comes, is no longer my truth. Now family means respect, equality, and accountability. If those aren't present, then silence and distance are not just acceptable, they're necessary. I remember the first time I told my parents, "If you want to be part of Noah's life, it has to be on terms of respect." The words felt heavy, but they carried the weight of years of pain and disappointment. I wasn't asking for permission. I was stating a new reality. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, but I knew I'd made the right choice. That moment marked a turning point, not just for them, but for me. It wasn't easy to enforce these boundaries. There were moments when I doubted myself, wondering if I'd been too harsh, too unforgiving. But every time I saw Noah's face, clear and innocent, I remembered what was at stake: his health, his future, and the peace I needed to provide at home. The toxic cycles of neglect and favoritism could no longer touch us. We've started building a new kind of family, a chosen family, one made of people who see us, who value us, and who show up without conditions. David's quiet strength has been a beacon throughout this journey. His support reminds me daily that love isn't just blood. It's commitment, care, and respect. Together, we've carved out a sanctuary where Noah can grow without the shadow of favoritism or betrayal. Sometimes I still catch glimpses of the old family in the background, news of social snubs, whispered judgments, or the occasional awkward encounter. But I no longer carry the burden of fixing those fractures or seeking their approval. Instead, I focus on what I can control and nurture: my son's laughter, the warmth of our home, and the quiet moments of joy that remind me why I fight so hard. The road ahead isn't smooth. I know there will be days when the wounds reopen and the memories sting sharply, but I also know that I've built something stronger, a foundation where respect is non-negotiable, and my family's worth isn't measured by lavish gifts or grand gestures, but by genuine love and accountability. If my parents or Emily ever want to reconnect, they will have to meet those conditions. No more silence, no more ignoring past harms, no more pretending everything is fine when it isn't. I won't open the door to manipulation or denial. The choice is theirs: grow through this painful reckoning or remain isolated behind walls of pride and denial. For me, the peace I've found in this new chapter is a quiet victory. It's the freedom of no longer being invisible, the strength of standing firm, and the clarity that love must be earned and nurtured, not demanded or taken for granted. My son deserves that, and so do I. So here we are, moving forward on our own terms, wary but hopeful. The past has shaped us, but it no longer defines us. In the end, the family I'm building is one where respect is the foundation, and love is the promise we keep every day. And that, more than anything, is worth everything.